Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm Garrett Justice, and today I am joined by Ron Swearin, who's the Executive Vice President of Marketing, Communications, and Brand at National MS Society. Ron, how are you doing today?
I am well, Garrett. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here.
It's so great to have you on the show. How's the weather out there in Denver this winter?
It's been a little dry. I mean, in the high country, they're getting lots of snow, but down here in the city where I live, it's been pretty dry. Although it's been a little cold last couple of days, so I'm not complaining. Not complaining.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear kind of a crazy winter all across the country.
Yes.
Praying for our friends in Texas who've had kind of a crazy time right now. So
Yeah, we're sending all of our thoughts and prayers to them and making sure that they're okay. It certainly is it's a disaster.
yeah, it is. Well, hoping everything will go well there. Excited to dive into our topic with you today. Really around this idea of brand valuation, what it is, how do you do it, and all of it. But before we do that, would you mind sharing for our guests a little bit of context of your background, your career so far, and what the National MS Society is, if they are not aware?
Yeah, sure. Well, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society is a movement by and for people who live with MS. And really, we're here to not just empower the lives of people who live with MS and help them solve everyday challenges, but ultimately, what we're really here to do is we're here to cure it. We're here to cure that disease. And I firmly believe that in our lifetime, we will find a cure for this disease. And so everything that we do, that's true north to try to find or create a world free of MS. And so we do a number of things to lead to those pathways to those different cures and those different solutions, whether it's support or advocacy or raising money. And so we've been around for 75 years. In fact, this is our 75th year of progress, and we haven't cured it yet, but we believe that we will in our lifetime. As far as
such an awesome mission. Sorry
Yeah.
to cut you off there. I was just saying, just such an awesome mission and so important. Love that.
Our CEO is she's really an amazing human being. She is so honed in on the vision, and really it is the ultimate tiebreaker, right? Because a lot of times when you're in conversations, the question is, does that get us closer to creating a world free of MS, or does that get us further away? And when you
Yeah.
start putting things in context of people's lives, it makes things a lot of fun to be a part of, and quite frankly, from a mission perspective, we really live those values, and so
Yeah.
it's really a pleasure. It's a pleasurable place to work for sure.
Which is again so core to building a strong brand. So again, excited to talk about our topic today. But again, before we do, tell us a little bit more about your career and background.
Yeah, well, it's weird, but I started off as a journalist, and I sort of orbited that craving for really being able to tell people stories and understand what people are thinking and feeling and doing, and trying to hone in on the essence of who people are, to really starting to tackle like really thorny public and policy issues as a reporter. And what I realized is when I was starting to get out of the news business was that I had this itch to create things and build things and become an entrepreneur. So I started with building little small companies. And ultimately, what I really realized, Garrett, was that I'm really good at working with internal organizations and helping them solve complex problems.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of good at it. That's what I'm good at. And
Mhm.
so I started working in-house at a number of different agencies. Was lucky enough to have a stint at NASA for a little while, and I learned all about product software and product development, and how you plan, do, and check review. And it really helped evolve my philosophy around marketing and around brands and around why brands matter. And then ultimately, I was lucky enough to be recruited to come here and work at the society, and I've been here for about 2.5 years, and every day, while a challenge in and of itself is, it's a real honor to be here.
That's awesome. Well, and I think, you know, one of the most important things you may have left out there for those who can't see Ron's background right now, there's some awesome lacrosse gear and pictures on the wall there. And you might recognize Ron if you're a avid lacrosse player. You were was it 18 years, a commentator
20,
there for 20
20,
years for
20.
the Major League Lacrosse. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Called games for Major League Lacrosse for 20 years, and the league just combined with the Professional Lacrosse League, Paul Rabel's group, and they're going to do some amazing things. And so, while I think my broadcast career might very well be over, I had some amazing times along the way and got to meet some wonderful, wonderful people. And I never thought it would last a year, let alone 20. So it was good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, excited to dive into this, especially with the, diverse background that you've had in your career so far, from being a TV reporter to working for the Colorado Hospital Association to NASA to, being a major league lacrosse announcer to now, where you're at with the National MS Society. So, our topic today really is around brand valuation. And so I guess to start us off, tell us a little bit more about what does that mean? What does it mean to value a brand, and why does that matter?
Yeah, it's when Garrett, you and I were exchanging some emails about this, we were talking about, what's the essence of the why? Like, why would you, everyone knows, or at least they think they know what a brand is. But when you think about a brand value is really a scientific and there's a methodical approach to how you really get a financially focused approach to understanding brand that defines the monetary value of a brand and its sources of that value. And so it really quantifies the value that the distinct characteristics of brands possess and their overall contribution to a business's mission or its overall value.
So really, is this what what you're saying is, should we be thinking about this like the Forbes lists and those other lists out there of like the world's most valuable brands, where Apple's brand is worth X billions of dollars? Is that the type of thing that you're talking about here?
That's precisely what I'm talking about. And what's interesting about that is that the company that really created that was an agency out of England called Interbrand.
Mm-hmm.
And the agency really started using this financially focused model for how you get to the overall value of what a brand derives from business. And they had a methodology around it. And it's qualitative and quantitative. And it's not just what products you sell, but it's also the influence and the reach and the spread of your brand and how people view your brand, how consistent it is. And we'll talk about the 10 factors of brand a little bit later in the show. But from that, the folks who really drove the ship at Interbrand literally moved to Colorado. And I was fortunate enough to meet them at a chief marketing officer networking party. And it just so happened that the guy who runs the show, he and I just struck up a conversation, and I nerded out for like like 3 hours. I was just so engrossed in this whole idea of brand value. And that was about 2.5, 3 years ago. And since then, I've really come to believe that organizations, small, medium, and large, can think about their brand in a whole different way. And it can really start to make champions internally in your organization around your brand. And people can start to become brand stewards, brand ambassadors inside your own brand when they start to understand that your brand really does have value. And when you do things that drive up that value, you actually can reap more benefits in terms of sales or commissions or whatever it might be. And when you do things to damage the brand, that also has an implication too.
Yeah, so fascinating. And you kind of hit on one point that you hit on that I want to just ask about too, is you said, that this can be good for companies or organizations of all sizes. As you were talking about this, the thought in the back of my mind, which I'm sure many of our listeners are thinking too, is, yeah, that sounds awesome. It sounds like a lot of work though, right? And yeah, it might be, but is this something that really small and medium-sized businesses can undertake and do without hiring a massive agency to kind of do all of this research for them?
As a matter of fact, yeah, I mean, I don't think that you can do it internally. I think that internally it requires a methodology, but you could certainly tap into a number of smaller firms, boutique firms that do this work. I'll shamelessly plug the firm that we worked with, a firm called Monogle, and they're here in Denver, and they're a global company as well, but they just happen to be located here in Denver. And they're very affordable. I mean, so if you're a small company or a medium company or a large company, yes, this will take time for you to get to your overall brand value. It'll take you from seed to sale roughly 6 months to really get a sense of what your brand is worth. And then you're probably looking at another 6 months to create a roadmap for how you're going to start tackling these internal and external factors of brand. But that year of doing that work doesn't mean that you only focus on that. It can be on a parallel track. And
Mhm.
it really only requires one person to kind of help Monagle like orchestrate. Like, I need to speak with someone in finance. I would like to get some interviews with people who are stakeholders. You got to just coordinate a lot, and then they do a lot of the lifting and a lot of the work. And there are other companies that do this brand valuation. So I would say that to any organization, whether you are small, medium, or large, that you should really think about it, because it's something that can really up the value of your brand.
Yeah, I love that. And again, I want to get into breaking down, what does this brand valuation actually look like, and the process that, kind of you went through, in your experience there. I guess before kind of transitioning to that, I'm curious to know, it sounds like you had this experience where you said you nerded out with, some of these leaders of Interbrand there, just kind of learn this process. Is that the moment when you realized you wanted to take this back and apply it in your current role, or was there other factors going on, in your current role, or things that were top of mind that made that really relevant for you in that moment?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I think that at first, Garrett, it was so overwhelming to me, and at the organization that I was at, I just didn't think they were in a headspace to even do this type of work. And quite frankly, I wasn't in a headspace to think it through. I couldn't see around corners with it. What am I going to do with it? How am I going to galvanize my own internal audiences to rally around this work and support this work? But when I got to the National MS Society, what really resonated for me was, in my first 2 weeks on the job, I was going on this really big listening tour. I was talking with, it's a 1,200 person organization, and I'm trying to talk with as many people as I possibly can in my first 30 days, just trying to suck the marrow out of, like, what do I need to learn, to get my
Mhm.
arms around the culture and the people. And I just kept hearing these stories of how authentic we are as an organization. And like, that just kept resonating with me. And I'm like, that's a brand factor.
Mhm.
Authenticity is a really important brand factor. And I'm like, I wonder how we compare against like the other factors of brand. And so as my listening tour evolved over like that 30 days, I started sprinkling questions about brand. Like, tell me a little bit about relevance. How do you see us as a brand in the community? Tell me a little bit about consistency. Where do we show up? Tell me a little bit about security. Are there other people out there that are, selling our products? And what I learned is that it was kind of it was the Wild West in
Mhm.
some regard. And that's not because the organization didn't care. It's just because if there's no one, minding the shop, these things can kind of get loosey goosey. And where it really came home for me was I was invited to a negotiation with a partner that was sponsoring one of our events. And I really felt like we gave our brand away. And
Mhm.
we let them take our brand and put it on their product, and we didn't reap any benefits of the sale.
Mhm.
And that didn't sit well with me. As someone who runs and owns the brand, it's my job to make sure that brand's making money
Mhm.
as part of what I do. And so that's when I reached out to the folks over at Monagle, and I said, what would it look like if we took a test drive with this? And what I realized is that not only should you do a test drive, but you should actually just get in the car and go, because it's not that hard. And so from there, I think it's really important. I went to my senior leadership team, and I socialized the idea. I said, look, I've only been here for a cup of coffee. I'm here. I don't know enough, but I do know that I need to get my arms around the value of our brand to help point me in the direction of where we need to go, or what the art of the possible could be. So what would you think about doing this as a first, like, co-venture? We could do it
Mhm.
together.
Mhm.
And everyone was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but you're the new guy. We'll give you we'll let you do it. And so off we go. But people rallied around it, and they started seeing the value of it as they were part of the interview process. And they realized that, oh my God, this actually makes a lot of sense.
That's awesome. And I want to jump kind of to the end before, again, we get into the meat of this. So after you launched that project, you had this awesome information. Then what are the benefits that came out of that? What did you do with that after you had gone through this process with Monogle, or maybe still ongoing? What are you continuing to do with that?
Yeah, so I kind of equate brand to fashion. It's never done, right? It's always
Mhm.
evolving. It's always changing. And here's the fun part. So we finish up our work with our first phase of brand valuation with Monocle, and such is the case with organizations like ours and like everyone else's. The pandemic hit, and when the pandemic hit, like most organizations, we had to stop, drop, and roll, and we had to figure out, okay, how are we going to save our core business? And so brand valuation had to get in the back seat. I couldn't move that project forward, even because it has a longer tail to it, right? It's going to take a little longer to get there. So we paused the work. So we had just created a roadmap for what we were going to tackle for the internal and external factors of brand over the next 3 years. We created this really cool roadmap for how we were going to align it against technological projects and other product releases that were coming down the pike. And we were super jazzed about it, but we hit the pause button. And in about another 3 weeks, we're going to start rebooting that work. So maybe check back with me in another 6 months and see how it's going.
Awesome. I'd love to do a follow-up and hear how that's going. All right. So I know our listeners and myself included are just ready to get into this. So, how do you do it? How do you measure the valuation of a brand? You mentioned that, there's some key internal and external factors that you look at. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. So when you're looking at the value of a brand, there's really three components that go into it. So the first is like the economic earnings that are generated by the brand. And the first thing that you're looking at is you're looking at your financial forecast. And so that's the discounted cash flow analysis of all relevant and associated aspects of the brand. And then the second part of it is that branded cash flow. And this is the part of the conversation, Garrett, that we're not going to get into, because that's where the real scientists come in and they start doing the math work. And so I was told there's going to be no math in this podcast, so we're not going to talk math. But the branded cash flow is really the percentage of the cash flow driven by the brand relative to the other factors, the 10 factors of brand. And then the final is your brand strength, and that's your overall score. So that's a holistic measure of the brand's performance on the key brand metrics that are used to measure the risks associated with the forecast of what you're going to be earning over the next coming years.
Okay. Excellent. Well, what I really like about this is, so often when we talk about branding or building a strong brand in an organization, to others who are not in marketing, creative disciplines, that can sound really fluffy, especially like those counterparts that are in, finance or in other, really, really deeper analytical roles. What I love about this is like a lot of the stuff that you're talking about is going straight to them and helping them get bought into this project, which I'm sure has so many benefits when you're done, and is so interesting to them because you're speaking their language then on something that traditionally could be, misunderstood or be seen as kind of fluffy, right?
So I think you're hitting the nail on the head. If you're a marketer and you're interested in your brand, the two people in your organization that you should go talk to are your COO and your CFO. Just go and talk about the why. Why would you measure the value of the brand? Well, first of all, you've got to quantify the impact of the brand on the business, and you really need to establish the brand's worth to partners and sponsors. I mean, it gives you a little bit of armor when you go into a partner meeting and you're like, I know my brand's worth, and I know what my brand is going to drive for your brand. So we can actually cut to the chase and know the sponsorship is not X, the sponsorship is Y, and here's why it is, right? It aids in smart investing with internal decision making. I think that it also galvanizes internal audiences and external audiences. And I think that the other part of it that I think that chief financial officers can really appreciate is that it unlocks growth opportunities in which you can innovate, expand, or even possibly double down.
Excellent. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. So give us a flavor of, you mentioned these like 10 factors that kind of go into it. What are some of those? What are some examples of those 10 factors that kind of go into, measuring that brand?
Yeah. So let's talk about the internal factors. So there are 5 internal factors of brand, and they are as follows. We can dive deeper into like what the meaning of each is, but the internal factors of brand are alignment. How aligned are you internally to the values and what the brand stands for? Commitment, that is like the level of importance placed on the brand and the amount of internal attention given to it. There is security, the degree to which you're actually protecting your brand from other people using it and maybe monetizing it in other ways. And then there's adaptability, like how adaptable were you during the pandemic, for instance? Were you
Mm-hmm.
stuck? Were you able to, stop, drop, and roll? And then authenticity, how authentic are you as a brand? Where do you show up? And the way you score these factors is you score them on a scale of 10. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you start looking at these. So you take the 5 internal and the 5 external, and you have a total of 100 points. Now, the best brands in the world aren't going to get 100 points. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
Googles, the Apples, the Amazons, they're not even going to get 100 points. So 100 is not happening, and
Mm-hmm.
1 is not happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So your brand's going to fall somewhere on that spectrum, 1 being the worst brand in the world and 100 being the greatest brand in the world. And from my perspective, it's not so much about where you fall on the spectrum. It's about what is the opportunity to move up to the next level on that spectrum. Because
Mm-hmm.
the difference between a brand score of 50 and a brand score of 58 is considerable in terms of
Yeah.
like what you can do for your overall value of your overall brand. And sometimes it doesn't take a lot of work. It just takes some good old fashioned elbow grease.
Mm-hmm.
Some you don't need a lot of expensive tools. I mean, sometimes internally it's just about getting people on the same page. It could be as simple as let's all have the same email signature when things go out. I mean, it could be as simple as some of these things.
Right.
You can like sweep the corners on some things and really, up your internal brand scores.
What I really like about that too, as I hear you explain that, is I can see how once you get that brand score, you can then break it down into, okay, which of these 5 areas of internal factors or 5 areas of external factors are we lowest on, compared to other areas. So you can kind of identify those gaps that you have or the areas where you're strongest or weakest and put more emphasis into activities to strengthen some of those areas or lean into those things that you naturally are really good at.
It's a great place to have conflict, I think, because it's a great place for people to get around a room and say, okay, we scored a 3, let's just say, in these 4 areas, internal and external total. Is that where we want to focus? Or we want to focus on taking where we were a 6 and take that to a 7? And I think that you get a lot of broad perspectives in the room and people can really share where they're at, but ultimately you can get consensus. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really what is important, I think, with a brand, is to drive consensus. And I really think that the person sitting in the marketing seat, it's their job to try to drive that consensus and lean into that conflict a
Yeah.
little bit about the brand, because people in an organization, they are all passionate about the brand. But what you can really find out about people is that they might be really passionate about one aspect of the brand, and they might not
Mm-hmm.
be looking at the holistic part. And I think it's the job of us as marketers to be looking at the whole and not the parts.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. So you mentioned these 5 factors internal. What are some examples of the external factors there too?
Yeah, so the external factors are really, I find the external factors fun, but I also find them a little intimidating. They're a little intimidating to me because they made me nervous going into
Mm-hmm.
it. I was like, I don't know how we're going to do on this. So those 5 factors, of external factors of brand, are relevance, the alignment between the brand's offerings and the needs or the expectations of the people who you're promoting your product to, right? Are you
Mm-hmm.
relevant? Uniqueness, and then consistency. And consistency was something that I think a lot of brands struggle with. You might show up one way on the web, and then you might look a little different in a mobile app setting. And then presence, and then understanding. And understanding is really an important thing. And I think that one interesting takeaway that we got as the National MS Society was that when we did some of the qualitative and then the quantitative analysis, a lot of people who had been donors to our brand, had given to our brand, they didn't necessarily have an understanding of who we are as a society. And what they were doing is they were unintentionally conflating the disease with who we are as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
And while that might not seem like a big problem, it is a challenge that we're going to have to grapple with over the next few years, because we know that as we're trying to cure this disease, we aren't the disease. We are part of trying to cure it. And there are ways that we are trying to enable and empower people who live with it to live their best lives, and not just people who live with MS, but also their family members
Mhm.
and their friends who are touched by the disease as well.
It's fascinating. Ron, this has been a really enlightening conversation. I really appreciate it. Last question I have for you as we kind of wrap up here is, if there were listeners out there who are thinking, oh, this is intriguing, like, should I endeavor to dive into something like this? What type of advice would you give to someone if they came to you and said, is this something that I should look into doing now or wait or later? How would you think about that?
I think that, look, everybody's different, but I would say this: think about it for a couple of days, and if you're still thinking about it on the third day, you should do something, right? If
Mhm.
you think about it on a Monday and it's not with you on Friday, and you forget what was that thing I was thinking about on Monday, don't do anything. But if you're
Mhm.
still thinking about it, if it's kind of like gnawing at you, do something. It is a worthwhile experience, and I will just say, from a marketing perspective, if you lead a team, there is nothing that can rally a team more than a common purpose or a common enemy, right?
Mhm.
And I think that if you can get people to start rallying around the purpose of your brand, well, that's really what marketing is all about, right? And it's not just a logo, it's not just a tagline, it's who you are, it's the essence of who you are. And I think that if you're a marketer and you start applying that brand framework to who you are and how you show up, it's kind of fun too. You can kind of
Yeah.
realize that, am I being authentic and how I show up? How am I presenting myself? So yeah, I mean, I looked at those 10 factors of brand, I'm like, I got a lot of work to do, but it's fun for an organization for sure.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, Ron, this has been excellent. Thank you so much for again taking the time to share your insights. If there are listeners that want to follow up with you, have additional questions on your process, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. If
Okay.
I'm Ron Zwerin, Zwerin, common spelling, on LinkedIn, and by all means, just reach out and by all means, add a note. We get a lot of LinkedIn messages that are
Yeah.
just, I want to connect with you on LinkedIn, and I'll usually connect with just about anybody on LinkedIn. But I would love it if you would add a note. Let me know that you heard the podcast, because I like to share that information back out with Garrett. And by all means, let's talk about brand, and let's talk about bourbon too. Be fun.
Love it. Love it. Well, thanks so much, Ron. Appreciate it. Hope you have a great rest of the day.
All right, be well. Thank you so much, Garrett.